So why don't we get it kicked off with a quick introduction? Maybe everybody can introduce themselves and their role.
Sure. My name is Eric Singley. I head up the consumer product team at Yelp.
My name is Kira Wampler, and I'm the CMO at Lyft.
Hey, I'm Natty Coleman, and I am the lead product designer at Sprig.
All right, fantastic. Well, let's start with the first question. We'll open it up to the audience in a few minutes here as well, but let's start with the first question of how does consumer engagement play into the product development process at your companies? Maybe you want to kick us off, Eric?
Sure. Yeah, I think engagement is part of every product manager's job in some way, right? I think first their first task is to figure out what the right product is. What should we be building, and then figuring out how we want to optimize that product. So we don't have an engagement team. We've got one product manager responsible for growth, and his job is to optimize flows kind of across the product. But I think engagement is something that we think about across the entire product.
I mean, it was interesting looking at your slides, and thank you for the talk. It was great. I mean, clearly, I hope every single one of you used Lyft to get here today if you didn't walk. But obviously, engagement and internal and external triggers are really important to us. And we want people using it not only for a safe ride to get home on a Friday or Saturday night, but with Lyft Line, like here in San Francisco, for your commute. As examples. So engagement and user engagement and frequent use of the product is extremely important to us.
Frequent use of our product is something we try to actively encourage. It's definitely, engagement is something we definitely we have goals we kind of keep in mind when we're framing all these discussions we have about features and everything like that. So it's definitely something we keep front of mind whenever we're discussing new features. And yeah.
Is there anyone specific in the organization? A lot of times I get questions from companies around, okay, well, how do I build an engagement, and who within the organization should be responsible for it? So is there a person that kind of leads the charge on figuring out what's increasing user engagement and what's not perhaps increasing user engagement?
Yeah, I think, again, that's if I were to kind of sum up the role of a product manager at Yelp, it's that, right? That is their role. I think first, they're trying to figure out, okay, what's the best thing that we could build for, whatever the goal is that product manager has set, and then.
So it's every product manager is thinking about.
I think so. Yeah, in some way, right? I mean, I think every PM wants a feature that people are going to use, and so figuring out ways to get more people to use that feature is something that's part of everybody's charter. I think the hard thing is first figuring out what are those key metrics that you're going to optimize towards. And I guess there's a couple of things that a product manager is going to do when they start out. First, do they have the right product, right? And I think there's a process that you go through to figure that out. And then what are the ways you're going to measure if you have the right product? And it's not until you answer that first question can you answer the second question. So right. I think first we'll figure that out. And then once we figure yes, the answer is yes, that we do have the right product, then you can figure out how to optimize it.
And what are you using for metrics? How do you know if what you've built is actually moving the needle on engagement?
Yeah, it depends on the product, of course. I think we have a number of things that we use depending on the product. Our key metrics are pretty obvious. Things like monthly uniques and reviews per user and session time, things like that. So I think any individual project might be targeted at one of those metrics. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that, and maybe I'm a little bit old school, but I've always sort of found this idea that engagement is somehow separate from the product that you're building to be a little strange. I certainly think that there are, whether it's like a little tooltip or some automated email flow, are there very specific kind of engagement tactics that you might be building or you should be considering? Absolutely. But I think fundamentally, if you're not building a product that solves a problem, fulfills a need that people have a desire to use, you're kind of dead in the water to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so from my perspective, I think similar to Eric, is that it's not only every product manager's job, it's the company's job. You shouldn't be in the business if you're not building something that's engaging users.
And we were talking earlier about how you found it a little frustrating recently around the push in the product development community around lean startup development, that maybe we've lost something in the process of thinking strategically about building for engagement.
Yeah. Now are we going to have our
Let's do it.
provocative debate? No, kidding. I think that we talked briefly a couple weeks ago, and again, this probably just sort of belies my age. I know you think I'm 18. No, kidding. But that I was at Intuit for many years, and we were really fortunate to be early adoptees of Eric Ries and Lean Startup, and that made sense back then because back then we were transitioning from, literally when I started at Intuit, we were selling software in a box that we put on a shelf, and we had like a real gold master that you stamped, CDs, and if you effed up, like that was a big amount of money that you spent. So it was waterfall development. It took forever, all that good stuff that happened. And then meanwhile, you're trying to transition to, online accounting software, or online tax or whatever. And something like that dramatic shift to lean startup and agile development made an enormous amount of sense. I think one of the things that I feel like many companies have lost sight of is that in the interest of kind of adhering so strictly to those principles, there's not a sense of like your first experience with this product is the best time to get someone to want to come back. And so if the first experience with this product is crappy because you're just trying to race to get it out because you're going to learn, then you've lost the opportunity to wow someone. I think Kristen Berman is going to be talking later, and I think they talk about she and Dan talk about minimum time to amazing. And so I think it's still about speed and moving quickly and learning, but it's also about taking a lot of what we've learned about great user experience, actually doing research, doing concepts, and then putting your best foot forward and learning from there. That's my soapbox. I'll get down from it.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that's something that my organization is still kind of struggling with. There was definitely like a proof of concept phase where they were rushing to get something out the door, and it's pretty good, and a lot of people liked it, and it was compelling just because it's a compelling use of technology and logistics and food. And now we're coming to the point where you come up against a wall and you reach some local maximum of what that product was or could be, and it kind of becomes unsustainable. And you actually, I think we've made the mistake a few times, I'm willing to admit, of losing customers simply because stuff was rushed out. We've made a lot of mistakes. We didn't get to wow those people, and we don't get that opportunity back. So I think there definitely does need to be kind of a refocus on making something that's amazing first. And
I used Sprig for the very first time last week in Palo Alto because you guys expanded to Palo Alto.
Yeah, fantastic.
It was pretty amazing. How many people know about Sprig? I've seen it before. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, maybe you can kind of give a quick explanation of how the service works.
Yeah, basically it's kind of like, I like describing it as a distributed restaurant. So basically, we offer a rotating menu. We get chefs in-house that source locally, and everything's kind of organic and healthy. And it gets to your house through our crazy wizardry and math. It gets to your place in probably within like 10, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
This is what amazed me about the experience, and what was, I guess, part of the variable reward phase that I talked about earlier. It was literally, I don't know if this was a typical customer experience or not, but we ordered our food and it came in 4 minutes. Like literally 4 minutes. The guy called us and said he was there at our doorstep. How does that work?
Predictive hunger.
Yeah, I have to credit our guys that know a lot more math than I do at our place. Walk into a conference room and there's just equations everywhere. It's a lot of smart predictive modeling.
'Cause you have these trucks like just waiting to deliver or something, right? Is that how it works?
It's interesting. We have a driver system where we have all these drivers kind of hot hold, and then they kind of refill after a certain amount of time. So we keep fresh meals out on the road. And based on eyeballs and predictive modeling, kind of in different zones, drivers will go out and they'll kind of, depending on the demand in those different areas, be able to deliver those things really quickly.
So back to habits, how are you predicting if this solution is one that's creating repeat engagement? What are you looking at in terms of metrics?
We gather a lot of data as far as customer ID and like what they order, and we obviously gather ratings and different things like that. But some of our key metrics do include repeat measures versus retention of different customers.
Are you looking at reorders per week? Like what would be a habituated customer to you, a customer who's kind of formed this habit of using your product?
We like to think that it would be nice if they could order a couple times a week, and that would be like a really heavy user. We see that some of our heavier users are doing that. There are some people that order 3 or 4 times a week. More of a regular use case where we would consider them a recurring user would probably be once or twice every 2 weeks. our stated goal is kind of to have a couple times a week, though.
Okay. Is there maybe a question for everyone? Is there anything that you've seen on the consumer psychology front, anything about user behavior that's been maybe a lesson you can share with us about something that you didn't expect to learn about the way your users think and behave that you've kind of learned over the years?
Sure, I can share one. So I think one tactic that every product manager likes to use is feedback in their product, or whether it's a like button or some way to tell a user that they're being heard, which I think is awesome. It's something you should try. One thing that we found, we have various ways of giving people feedback for their various ways they're contributing on Yelp, and we found that the feedback, kind of the weight of the feedback has to match the weight of the contribution from the user. So more specifically, we found that if someone writes a review on Yelp, which is a pretty weighty task, if someone's investing 10, 15 minutes of their time, if you just have something like a like button on that actually, at best case, the user's contribution rate stays the same. Worst case, actually goes down, because kind of what we found is that people feel like it almost cheapens their contribution. It's almost you did all this work, I just kind of gave you a little pat on the back. However, if you look at something like a photo contribution, which is a fairly easy task, and a like on a photo actually does increase photo usage. So you have to find ways to match the feedback and the reward that you're giving the user for their contribution type. So things like the Elite Squad on Yelp, which is this sort of nebulous reward that we don't tell people exactly how to get, that's more proportional that people feel to review contributing. So they're a lot more likely to gun for that, and that does increase review writing.
Interesting.
So it's like just making those rewards proportional. All rewards are not created equal.
Right. Do you guys think of creating the habit of use with the person finding the restaurant, which is actually not that frequent of a behavior, or is it with the reviewer that you're really trying to focus on the habit?
I mean, I was thinking about this as you were speaking earlier. So yeah, in many ways, Yelp it's hard to form a habit. I can't increase the number of meals per day or the number of dental incidents you have, right? So how do I get people to use their product more? And one thing we've done for most active users is we've given them things to do on Yelp that aren't utilitarian, right? It's not finding a business, it's maybe hanging out on our talk forums, or it's giving feedback to other users. And so the idea is you create that community around activities that aren't the core product, and then they're sticking around and they're using the product in other ways, and then they'll stick around to do the thing that you want them to do.
Right.
So yes, we are trying to create a habit and trying to increase engagement more broadly, but it's not necessarily always the same thing, because there's a ceiling to the number of, say, searches per week that someone's going to do.
Right. So it's really about these rewards of the tribe, these social rewards, the social reinforcement that's keeping people engaged.
Yep.
Awesome.
I think that one of the sort of lessons learned that I feel like we relearn, and a lot of the businesses that I've been in have been sort of information heavy, so at Intuit with accounting or tax. I was most recently at Trulia with sort of buying a home, which is kind of the biggest financial decision that you make in your life. And I think in a lot of these situations, product folks and marketing folks often think, you need all the information. We need to show it all to you. We need to give you all the detail. And then if we show it all to you, you will learn something. And then, you will be better at it and you will make better decisions. And I think it's just sort of like time and time again, what we found is like that never works. And showing people it all and giving them all the information, or at least sort of the way that has often happens, doesn't work nearly as well as, and I think many folks in the room are designers, it's like streamline it, what's most important, progressive disclosure, ways to make it easier for people to get to the information that matters to them the most, and then give them the tools to go to the next level of depth, which is really hard, right? Because typically you've either got some company myths, or how you started, the business, or why you started the business, or what worked at the beginning, and so then you especially for older products, and then you kind of keep lobbing things on top of it. And we found this at Trulia, right? Like our product detail page, we're just like, does anybody scroll, right? So, I think that kind of continues to be this lesson learned of like just not inundating people with information, helping them through the process, anticipating the things that they need predictively, which is very similar to what we do, at Lyft in terms of cars and availability, and not overwhelming the user as much as you really want them to, because you really want them to learn and to know.
Yeah. And how are you making that judgment call of who to build for, right? You can You can barf up all the information on the page, but then you're going to increase cognitive load. You're going to make it less likely for the key behavior you want people to actually do to occur. So how do you decide which user you're going to build for, and you're going to optimize that path as opposed to other users?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to what your business goal is, right? I mean, I think that at the end of the day, it's like what is your business here to do, right? And who is your business here to serve? And so, if your business is here to serve, and again, this is like an old example, but back when I was at Intuit, my early days, I worked on the product for accountants. So I had like the sexiest job on the planet because I did accounting software for accountants. And it was amazing because it turns out that accountants recommend nearly 60% of QuickBooks to small business owners. And the number one reason why they recommend it is because they use it. So how do you build that product for them that makes sense for them and makes it easy enough for them to use such that they would want to recommend it? And in that case, it made a ton of sense to do things that were about higher cognitive load. I mean, this is a long-winded answer, but one of the things that I loved about what I learned at my time at Intuit is about what you learn by watching people and what they do versus asking them. And so we did a ton of ethnography, and we would see accountants time and again in their office using a 10 key while they were using QuickBooks, because they didn't believe the math. And so we built 10 key we built it into the program so that they could do it on the keyboard instead of having it separate. And we got hammered by it internally. Like, why would you do that? QuickBooks works. Da, da, da. And it was a wildly successful feature. Accountants loved it because they're like, oh, good. It gives me a check. And in that example, like we would never have done that in the small business part of the product because that would have been way too much for them. We overinvested in the accountant side of the business because it was worth it for the rest of, frankly, for overall sales in terms of recommendations.
Has there been any lessons like that with Lyft, that uncommon behavior, something you learned from observing the user, or something around consumer psychology around designing Lyft?
Yeah, I think that, I think one of the things that's been really, and I'll be like, I've been at Lyft 6 weeks, so, to be very fair, some of what I can share is what I've heard from John and Logan as well. I think actually one of the things that's really interesting is the in-car experience in this moment, these moments of delight. And I think what you talked about earlier about sort of this mystery and surprise. And I think one of the things that's been so fascinating for us as a company is this idea that that you can have these memorable moments and you're not quite sure what it's going to be when you get in. And you might not actually be sure if you want it when you first take a Lyft. And then what we see time and time again is people are like, I didn't want to get out of the car, or that was amazing, or he had Capri Suns, or, right? And what I think has been really genius about what John and Logan have done is that and the whole company, is that they've really fostered this community and this sense of mystery and this ability to actually have these variable experiences that sum up to something really special and magical that keep people coming back. So I think the surprise is that, like, if you were to say 2 years ago, like, you're going to get in a car and you're going to sit in the front seat and you're going to be offered a Capri Sun, and you're going to be like, are you effing kidding me?
Yeah.
And today you'd be like, that sounds super
I really want a
fun.
Capri Sun now.
I know you like Capri Suns.
I think what else is really great about the product experience with Lyft or your competitors is that it also gives me certainty and control about an inherently variable experience.
Right.
Not every product has to insert variability, but sometimes helping us gain control over something that is already variable. Like the old way of calling a cab would be, call the cab. They always tell you they're there in 10 minutes. Sometimes they're there in an hour. Sometimes they're there right away. I want more certainty and control. So just the fact that I can watch the car coming to me gives me agency, gives me control over something that was previously out of my control.
Right. Just like waiting for the train, waiting for the bus that never shows up. Same experience that you're.
Right. I find myself when I'm waiting for my cab using Lyft, I'm doing this and this all the time, right? Looking to see and looking at my phone to see how far it is. Right. Any unusual insights that you've discovered around consumer psychology?
Yeah. So something we kind of struggle with is always the question of whether or not our customers want to plan meals, or whether or not we want to be kind of that reflexive on-demand kind of a thing. So we've kind of encountered that when we've done interviews with people, that a lot of people actually do want to plan meals. I mean, that's something I do. It's something everybody does. But But a lot of other people, just like being able to count on a service to just do that whenever they need it and not have to think about it. So it's kind of the eternal struggle within our company whether or not we should, do advanced menu planning or different things like that and kind of make that transparent to the customer. So far, we have sort of developed progressive disclosure and like kind of just show this information to certain people that kind of have to dig for it, or not surfacing that information up front, making that cognitive overhead decision up front. So I think it's something we are still struggling with. I think that right now the model we're kind of operating under is a service that you can count on that's super on demand all the time. So
Yeah. What I think is interesting about your hook is that the internal trigger for your hook is not necessarily hunger. It's this question, this uncertainty of what am I going to do for dinner tonight, right? It's not the hunger itself. It's something you do way before you're hungry. It's the uncertainty of not knowing. Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? It's going to be a lot of work. So you just present the user with 3 options, right? Is it always 3?
yeah, most of the time it's 3.
So
Sometimes it's 4 or 5.
Right. So as opposed to like a huge menu with 40 things on it, you've reduced all the cognitive overhead to make that action super simple. Just pick from these 3 things. And I'm wondering, will you use customer data based on what they order and what they didn't order to tailor future offerings, perhaps? Could that be a form of investment in the future?
Yeah, that's actually something we're looking at. It's a lot of kind of data science work that we're looking into. We have a couple of people kind of combing through a lot of data that we have on ratings and ordering history. We have all those menus categorized and everything like that. So we are measuring all that stuff. So that's something we're definitely looking at. So the more you use the system, the more obviously that we surface items that are more relevant to you.
Excellent. So why don't we open it up and see if anybody has any questions? Please. Do we need a mic or I'll repeat the question for now.
This question's for all 3 of you. I was wondering how much and how often you speak or survey your customers. What I mean by that is get actual feedback, whether it's sitting there watching them use your app or web interface, or just sending out surveys to get information. How often does that happen, and how do you?
So the question was, for those of you who can't hear, how often do you observe your customers, survey your customers, look for customer feedback on your product, and how do you do that?
We do a combination. So we have continuously running feedback on all our orders, and that gets flagged and signaled to us. We are able to filter through that. We also send out surveys periodically to different customer segments. And then we also do user interviews, and we do usability testing as well. The rhythm of that is kind of up in the air right now. It just depends on kind of what resources we have at the time. So I can't really give you a definite answer like, we do this every 2 weeks or 6 months. We'd like to have a more regular cadence, but just depends on resources.
Yeah, I can share Lyft experience and then just prior at Trulia. Maybe I'll start Trulia because it's a little bit more of an established process. But at Trulia, every Wednesday, the user research team blocked off the day for sort of, we're going to do research today. So whichever team needed help that day, whether it was user interviews, ethnography, surveys. I mean, didn't mean that it didn't happen on other days, but I think that was actually a very useful tool for having that sort of coordinated and regular, especially because the research team at Trulia covered the entire company. So it was a useful way to make that something easy to do. Both at Trulia, certainly at Lyft, and I'm sure we all do the same, but it's a mix of learning about users from what they're telling you. So whether that's through Net Promoter surveys, the feedback that we get at Lyft in the app, feedback that we get from drivers, but also looking at user behavior, right? So really bringing the combination of the qual and the quant together. So quantitatively, are we seeing something different in the data? If yes, can we look qualitatively to see if there's something that helps us better understand it, and vice versa. I will say one thing that's really lovely at Lyft is the driver community. And again, I think going back to what the company has done such a fabulous job building over a short period of time is very, very close connections with our driver community across, our cities. We started with Facebook lounges in every city. They've evolved to a little bit more centralized way of connecting with the drivers. But we have a variety of tools where we connect with our drivers live as well as online that give us a lot of additional insight about what's working and what's not.
Yeah, we do a lot of different things, but I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, we've got a very vocal community of users. So if we ever mess anything up, we hear about it immediately. So that's awesome. You can also review Yelp on Yelp, so that's a good channel as well. One thing I always tell folks that I love is, we've got an awesome group of employees at the company that all use Yelp. So go down and talk to some sales folks and talk to 5 people and show them some mock-ups and get their feedback. And that takes you 10 minutes and you probably get 60, 70% of the feedback you need. So I'm a huge fan of just the ghetto 5-minute, people in your building kind of usability testing.
In the back there? Yeah. Right. So I'll take this one, I guess. So I think there's 4 ways. The first way, so so those of you who can hear, the question was, how do you break an existing habit? So many of us we identify the habit we want to we want to hold in our customers' lives, but someone else already holds that habit. So let's say you're creating a product that serves this internal trigger of boredom, but you're competing with Facebook, you're competing with television as the current habit for what people do when they're bored, perhaps, or perhaps in the enterprise, there's a solution that people are already using. So as far as I know, there's only 4 ways to steal your competitor's habit away. The first is to help people go through the hook faster, so greater velocity. So a product that can create a solution to go through those 4 steps quicker than the competitor wins. And that typically happens when there's some technology that shrinks the distance between the recognized need and the reward. So it's really an innovation in the action space, something that makes getting the reward occur faster so that people can go through those 4 steps quicker. And if you think about it, that's the function of all technology, whether it's from the cotton gin to the iPhone, all technology does that. It shortens the distance from the need to the reward. So that's the first one, is going through the hook at a greater velocity. The second way is to increase the frequency of going through the hook. So not speed through the hook, but how frequently the user interacts with the hook. So for example, this typically happens when there's some kind of technology that becomes more ubiquitous in our day-to-day lives. So when we went from desktops to laptops to mobile and now to wearable, every time that happened, the habit deck gets reshuffled. The old habits now have to be brought into the new interface that's with us more frequently. Right? So the way we used to interact with certain products, so I just posted an article on my blog about how Microsoft Office lost this amazing habit. It's still the most used productivity software out there, but Google Docs has had a tremendous rise because Google Docs or Microsoft Office was built in the age, pre-internet, when you bought it on a drive and you installed it on your machine. And now with cloud storage and now with mobile optimization, that's really what Google Docs is built for. So Google Docs just worked better on mobile because of this new interface that was with us more frequently. People could engage with it more often, and so there was this incentive to switch over, and the habit deck was reshuffled. The third way is when the reward is more rewarding. So for example, when a product can be more fulfilling, more engaging, can scratch the user's itch better, that critical third step of the hook, that's the third way that you can steal a customer's habit away. So example of that would be Snapchat versus Facebook, right? Why did Zuckerberg offer Snapchat $3 billion and they turned it down? Well, because he saw Snapchat as a competitive threat, because think about it. We know that what's special about Snapchat? What makes Snapchat messages so much more special than a Facebook message? Well, they explode, right? They self-destruct. So what does that do to the content in those messages? We know that about 17% of Snapchat messages have some kind of sexting component, right? They're more interesting, they're more engaging. And so if it's a Snapchat message coming into you at the exact same time as a Facebook message from your Aunt Bertha, which one are you more likely to open? Right? The reward is more rewarding. There's more variability. It's more exciting. Of course, you're going to open up that Snapchat message before the Facebook message. So that's an example of the reward becoming more rewarding. And the last way is to make it easier in. So if you can make a product, if there's barriers to using the product in the first place, remember, engagement is different from growth and onboarding. So if there's some kind of barrier to getting into the product in the first place that you can take away, that makes it easier for users to start using the product, that's the fourth way, easier in. Sure. And yeah. Oh, sorry. The question was, has anybody on the panel figured out internal triggers that they're targeting that perhaps are surprising in some way? Do you know what do you think about, I don't know if they think about it in that context, but do you think about your internal triggers or what you're catering to, what itch you're satisfying?
Yeah. So I mean, like you're saying, it's beyond hunger. It's more of kind of the uncertainty of what I'm going to eat. And doing some research on that, we kind of discovered that there are something that was surprising. Where there are a few sort of I guess food cultures that we cater to, or the people with dietary needs or whatever, that like vegans or vegetarians or people that eat gluten-free food. We do have options for those kinds of things. Those people actually regularly check the app just for those things. So servicing like filtering options or push notifications that let people know. I mean, that's kind of turning that internal trigger into an external trigger to kind of help close that loop. But that was something that was surprising, that they kind of do that regularly in the morning to like see like, okay, obviously my choices are limited in food, around like restaurants and stuff like that. It gets kind of tough. So this is kind of the easiest option for me, and I'm going to check that regularly. So making that easier for those users is kind of
What Sprig does, I think, is really nice. I think it's an element of good external triggers versus spammy external triggers, right? Notifications that bug and annoy us versus external triggers and notifications that actually please us and delight the user, is that you ask the user what time of day you want to be notified about today's menu. And so what you're doing is essentially linking the time when the external trigger is received, when the notification is appearing, and when the user is most likely to feel that itch, right? So say, okay, tell me about your menu at 5 p.m., because that's when I'm most likely to be to wonder, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? This uncertainty is now kind of, here you go, here's a solution to scratch that itch that you have. It's very well timed together.
Yeah, has a side benefit of evening out demand curve. So.
I think what we've discovered is that I think it started with wanting more control. So the removing the negative trigger of lack of control. I think what we've seen really over the last year plus is also that we're overcoming a trigger of sort of the boredom or the mundane experience of getting from A to B to having it be more of a memorable, surprising experience. So I think it's a little bit of the like what gets you in and then what keeps you in terms of where we found the triggers and then which triggers are meaningful to which parts of the experience.
Any surprising? You want to add anything? Or?
I mean, again, I think we focus so much on the utilitarian part of the experience, and so I think for our review writers, internal triggers sometimes can be. We can help with that through social means, by having like your social network on the site. But for us, I focus more on like I have a need and how can I fulfill that need, and it's tied to a utility.
Okay, please. So the question was, how do you design for effective notifications? And I think that's asked to Eric.
For effective notifications, yeah. We haven't done a ton with notifications. I think it's underexplored for us. I think there's, again, coming back to the utility question, kind of anticipating what people are going to need in their week and tailoring that messaging to users. I think mostly it's about the utility of the notification. I think the second you have a notification that's not useful, you lose that user immediately. So how do you find a notification information that you can deliver to people in a timely way that's also going to be useful? Sure. It can be noisy, so I think you have to be careful. Right. Yeah, I think you think about kind of walking down the street and suddenly you get buzz saying like maybe there's a a restaurant down the street. It has to be met with a need. Am I hungry right now? And anticipating that need is difficult. So I shy away from really aggressive notifications unless I can really predict a need.
So we at Trulia, we launched in the summertime nearby home alerts. And in fact, I mean, it's been a wildly successful part of the product experience. And it starts first with the Trulia user saying, like, I'm interested in a house or a search, right? So it starts with first, like, they've given permission. But I think what's really cool about it, I mean, think about, here is that, and it works for home buying or for apartments, is that as you're walking around San Francisco, you may have no idea that there's like a for lease sign, 20 stories above you, but you get a ping on your phone that says, notification that says there's a nearby apartment for rent. And I think one of the things that the team built in that was super smart is that you can obviously, change the defaults. So for example, well, I would have the defaults on only on the weekends because I don't want to live in San Francisco, but I work in San Francisco, so I don't really care about nearby home alerts in San Francisco. But when I was home shopping last spring, I wanted to know over in the East Bay what was nearby me at that moment. So I think it's totally about giving the user the right level of controls and allowing the person to opt in first and then making it wildly useful. I mean, when you are in the heat of an apartment search or a home buying search, that like knowing, especially in a lot of these markets where it's very heated, like knowing that second that it's a new house, it's on the market, it's near you, go take a look is super relevant.
All right, let's do one last question in the back here. Of how do you? Huh. Okay. Anybody have any anecdotes to share around useful data? Any data that changed your product or affected what you decided to build from an engagement perspective?
All I can say, like, I mean, I interact with data in sort of a lightweight way where I'm not digging in very deeply into kind of from a logistical standpoint. Some of the stuff we try to gather as much as possible and kind of keep it in a relational sort of database so I can compare statistics that are relevant to what I'm looking at. I can't think of any specific anecdotes off the top of my head, just like
I mean, one process that I've seen pretty effective when it comes to habit formation perspective is this process of habit testing. That what a lot of companies I see doing is that they'll find which of their users have the habit already, and you define what habit looks like. So if it's ordering dinner 3 times a week, if it's riding in Lyft once a week, or whatever that number might be, that would identify a user as being a regular user, being a habituated user. So the first thing you do is identify. The 3-step process is identify, codify, modify. So the first thing you do is identify which of your users have the habit. They're exhibiting the behavior of a habituated user. And then after you identify, you codify. You figure out what steps that user took to become a regular user. Right, so the Twitter story goes, and many of you might have heard this story, where they found that the people who were most likely to use the product habitually were the ones that followed people very quickly into the onboarding process. Those who followed a few folks up front were the ones who continued to use the product most often. So what did they do? What's the current onboarding experience at Twitter today? When you sign up to Twitter, guess what you're going to do? You're going to follow people, right? So they show you Oprah, and they show you other famous celebrities. They show you people that you're very likely to follow because they know that that's the path that habituated users took. So the first thing you do is you look at which of your users are already habituated, you identify them, you codify the steps in the process that made them unique, and then you modify your current product experience so that everybody takes that same path. That's the best example I've seen.
I was going to say, too, I think one thing that we found is, this is maybe a little bit controversial, but actually tell people to ignore data a lot of the times. I think we're in this world a little bit where, yes, of course you should measure things. I think it's very easy to shape numbers to what you want them to mean. And I think the best product managers I've talked to use data to inform their intuition, right? It's like they understand their product from a quantitative perspective, but they use that then just to make better product decisions. And yes, they're using data to see if whatever they're trying to move goes up or down. I think that's great. So you should know what those metrics are and then toss them out the window and figure out just what's going to be best for people.
All right. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Nir. Thank you, Eric, Kira, Nadi.